Got it.
Hi.
I think, are we live? Yes, we're live. Oh, shoot. I'm on the wrong damn thing. Got it. Oh, shoot.
Bloopers.
Bloopers. Yes, I'm streaming. Oh, well, that's okay. I'm
Real life.
streaming on the wrong channel. Uh, hmm. Let's just keep going. Just
Okay.
go.
All right.
Yeah. So what's going on, Nina? After
Yeah.
what you've been on, this is at the end of your
Week 3.
week 3. Holy moly guacamole.
Crazy. Time flies when you're in the present moment.
I like that.
Yeah. So it's been really fun to get to shadow calls and sit in on coaching calls that Coach Terry's doing with her many studio owners around the country. And one of the themes I've noticed, and of course I recall from owning a studio, is the beautiful perpetual issue slash gift of staff, of our teachers, our beautiful teachers who we love and sometimes, like that. And so one of the first things I learned as a new small business owner is that if we're depending on any one person, even me as the studio owner, we don't have a business. We have a hobby. And yet
Ooh, I like that.
it's not original. I read it in the E-Myth, that that book, that little
Right, right, right.
and that really hit me. I remember when I first heard that, I'm like, what? But of course it needs me. Of course it needs. And it's true. Yes. And if we don't have SOPs, if we can't duplicate the task at hand, then the business is doomed to fail, truly. Because what happens if somebody gets sick, somebody has a baby, somebody decides they don't want to do this job anymore, or you decide that it's not working out as
Yeah.
the owner, you decide this is not working out. So if we build our classes and our schedule around a person, then we're really setting ourselves up um, for a big uh-oh when
Yeah.
when the inevitable happens. And of course we want longevity. We want um, our staff and our teachers to stick with us forever, assuming it's working out. But sometimes, even best case scenario, everybody does their best and we love each other and it's hug, hug, kiss, kiss. But life happens and somebody needs to move on.
Yeah.
So that's sort of an area of interest and discussion.
And I think we've talked about this numerous times before. Some of it comes down to, particularly for the original 26 and 2, aka Bikram, is if that is one of your primary class types, which a lot of us in the YC are,
Yeah.
is finding those teachers, because there's not this mill that's cranking out hundreds of Bikram teachers twice a year, every year. So what do you do to fill that gap? So this is where you got to get creative. Either do your own training, or there's lots of 26 and 2 trainings out there
Yeah.
that you can,
Yeah.
people can take advantage of. Carol, what did you do at your studio before you sold it for Bikram, for specifically for 26 and 2 teachers?
I mean, probably not the most, sorry about my voice, by the way. Probably not the best way to go, but I just trained them on my own and I brought them up.
Why is
I
that not
mean,
the best way to go? I think it
well,
is.
I don't know. I didn't ask for any monetary, like it was basically a mutually beneficial thing where it's like, I think you'd be a great teacher. Is that something you'd want to do? I did a one-on-one with them and brought them up. And honestly, I thought they were some of the stronger teachers because
Very old
they
school.
were, yeah. Well, yeah, I guess that's
That's how it
That
used
is
to
the original way.
yeah, that is the original way. Yeah.
be. The student oral tradition.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and it really helped. It helped the studio. It produced good teachers in my mind. I think they had a lot of loyalty because, they didn't really have to invest a whole lot of money, but it was that nurturing that
Yeah.
was a part of the whole process.
Yeah.
They got feedback on the regular, et cetera. So it was just, that was the easiest way that I knew how, rather than like send them somewhere for I don't know how many weeks and then
Yeah.
get them back and then still have to go through a training process.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You got to still train them.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what we did. Because especially like I think right now I've seen a lot more of the original 26 and 2 trainings being popping up all over,
Yeah.
but there was sort of a very barren time.
Yeah.
I felt like for a while, and that's when we really needed people, and that's how we did it.
Well, and it's also interesting, and I don't think this is just exclusive to 26 and 2, but there is, it was, and I think continues to be some prejudice about, are you truly a 26 and 2 teacher if you haven't gone to certain type of training, right? And so then that's, I think, something, and I think that, I mean, as much as, it kind of goes to, do you have to have an RYA certification? Right? It's like Yoga Alliance. I mean, I'm not, no shade on Yoga Alliance. They've done a brilliant job of positioning themselves as the authority for yoga. But that's just what they did. They marketed well, and they've just sort of positioned themselves as that,
Yeah.
you
They
know,
created the idea that's like optics.
yeah,
For that
exactly.
alone, people are bought in.
Yeah, 100%. But at the end, what does that necessarily mean? It doesn't really mean anything, because you can have an RYA certified teacher training if you meet certain criteria, and that alone doesn't mean that it's a good training, right? Just because I think it's like you have to have so much of anatomy, so many hours of anatomy, and so
Yeah.
many hours of this, and so many hours of that. It's like, okay, yeah, this training checks all the box.
Right.
But I think, to Carol, to your point, having that one-on-one,
Amazing.
again, it's the lineage, it's the tradition. I mean, actually, it's how it used to be in everything. I mean, even you go way back, if you wanted to be a lawyer, you would go study with a lawyer. There wasn't law school. Or if you wanted to be a doctor, it was like the mentor and apprentice,
Right.
which is one of the oldest traditions there is for passing on knowledge. So why not have that? And I know some people have very, very successful teacher trainings, which is great. And it's a lot of work and a lot of time.
Yes, it is.
Did
So
you, I was
yeah,
just saying, Nina, did you do YTTs when you had your studio?
did. And totally on topic of the Yoga Alliance. So that was in 2016 when we started the conversation, myself and one of my lead teachers at that time. And she had been teaching like almost 30 years, and I had been teaching at that time for maybe 15 years or something like that. And so neither of us were Yoga Alliance, right? Because we did Bikram training.
Right.
And so, but we were like, okay, we understand that that's in the collective consciousness that this is of value. So let's reach out to them, let's find out. And what we found out was that in order for our training to be Yoga Alliance, we would need to take a Yoga Alliance teacher training to ourselves be accredited. And it's like, we did the math, and it's like, no, so that we can be trained by some 25-year-old just to get the letters by. So we said, no, let's just do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And, because Bikram teacher training didn't recognize Yoga Alliance and Yoga Alliance didn't recognize.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we did, and we created our curriculum. But what we wanted to do was to meet or exceed the Yoga Alliance credentials. So for all of those anatomy hours and contact hours. And so our training in the end, we kind of build it as a 200-hour training. But in the end, it was probably more like 300 hours, given all the work that
Yeah.
it's a lot of work, but we created the curriculum and we rewrote the dialogue and we infused the training with, and actually I'm still leading that training, but I've added on. So now it's trauma informed. It's like when you learn more, you want to give that to your
Right.
students. And we have a diversity, equity, inclusion portion of the training. Actually, that's really infused throughout the whole thing. So I feel really good about having created my own training.
Yeah.
And the studio that I sold 4 years ago still has those teachers. I think five
Yeah.
of them ended up teaching at the studio out. And so we got 5 teachers that, it's like train your own. And they're huge leaders in the studio still to this day. So I'm
Are
a
the
big component of that.
Yeah. Are the teachers you train, Carol, still teaching for Pure Hot?
Several of them, yeah. Yeah. It's
Mm,
like life happens, and some of them just went on to do different things, or, nothing that, was negative about, I didn't have a negative experience with those teachers coming up. It's triggering for me. I had a conversation with somebody who has now spent tens of thousands of dollars on multiple trainings to make sure that she's at this, upper echelon of like knowledge and feeling really confident about like what she's learned. And she also noticed that the people around her aren't even nearly as closely to that level. And they're, it's like, it's just, I think it was sort of a slap in the face that they're sort of either they have a big following without this type of training, or they have more students without the level of knowledge that she has. So it's sort of like she's put herself in a little bit of a detriment monetarily, thinking that she needed all this and these numbers and letters by her name. And then she's realizing like, oh, these other people aren't there. It's like, so I guess it speaks to a bigger question of like the industry as a whole, and like, and you have to be careful with, the trainings that you go to and who you're learning from. And like, I don't know, I think it just, there's something bigger there, but
Yeah.
Interesting, Carol. And
Yeah,
what's driving your need or your
Yeah.
perceived need?
Yep.
I have a personal ethos of continued education, and I think that it's my personal ethos, but I also believe that it's our ethical duty as teachers to continue our education. I think that's an ethical duty. And actually, that's outlined in the California State um, Yoga Teacher Code of Conduct. I think that's what they call it. And I think that's really interesting. And what's driving the need for continued, is it to get that number, those letters next to your
the
name?
alphabet soup.
And right. And it's like, remember Bikram used to say, what's the good of having if you don't know what to do with it? So what are those teachers who don't have all those letters next to it? What do they have that is that's giving them, is it their way of being? Is it that they're really amazing teachers? I mean,
Yeah.
or is it just that they're good at marketing themselves on social media?
Those are all good points. I mean, some people just have that. I've said it before, that je ne sais quoi. There's just that something that sometimes it can be called charisma. It's just some people just have that ability to attract others.
Right.
And I mean, and unfortunately, that can be for both positive and negative. We all can think of people,
Right. Are they
just
narcissists?
yeah, exactly. So there's both of that. So sometimes it just is personality. And I think that's sometimes when we get to that cult of personality. I think where it becomes is like, if you have that, and again, this is my personal opinion, if you have that ability, it's how you use that, right? Is how you use it for good. Do you use it to draw out others, or is it just feeding your own ego? And this is where we have to sort of like really look in that mirror and be humble. It's like, okay, is this just feeding my ego, or am I creating a space to help others thrive? And, certainly having alphabet soup after your name does not necessarily mean that you're a good teacher or whatever. It just means you have a lot of knowledge. And then we've talked about this before. Then you could sometimes have that curse of knowledge where you have so much knowledge that people are like, what are you talking about? And then again, is the alphabet soup feeding your ego as well?
Right.
Or is it a lack of confidence, thinking that, oh, I have to have this stuff to be a better teacher, because maybe there's a lack of confidence there. I don't know. I mean, there
Yeah.
are plenty of people in the world that never have a formal education that are incredibly, successful. Well, a little guy called Albert Einstein,
Right.
guy called Bill Gates, right? It's like we sometimes, I think we get into this thing of saying we have to have it. I mean, there's obviously there's a certain level you have to be able to do something. And then I think it's just like going back to that mentor-mentee, it's doing it.
Yeah.
It's teaching, like the continuing education means teaching, seeking out teachers, taking classes, learning, growing, getting feedback on your teaching and giving feedback, creating that feedback of culture within your studio. And what does that look like? Been having some conversations with clients recently about how do we create a review process for
Totally.
teachers? You know, what are we doing there? How do we measure it? Is it quantifiable? Now it's particularly, I mean, like I know Enwalla has this, and My Body can have it as well. Certain softwares will have like a Fit Grid has a whole thing on the profitability of the teacher, the revenue they generate. And this has been sort of an interesting conversation with some of the clients is how much of that do you share with your teachers?
Mhm.
And some of my clients are particularly the ones that have done like the on-sites or have done the sales training where we do share some of those key KPIs with the staff, is now because they started to share them, and I think this is a good thing, is now they are sharing those numbers on a regular basis and letting the team know,
Yeah.
okay, this is what our retention rate is. This is what our first visit return rate is. Because one of my clients, it's actually Kristen Sapp at Orange Lotus, is she's now giving the teachers, because we think, oh, our community, all these members. Well, she says, okay, yeah, last month we got this many members, but guess what? We lost this many members. And since she started to share that with the teachers, they are now this greater awareness. They're like, what do you mean? What? We lost that many members last month? You know, because they're seeing the new, I think it was a great way just to point out, yeah, this is why we do this.
Right.
This is why we continually have to do this first visit flow. This is why we continually have to talk about developing a habitual yoga practice and getting people to come back and take class. Because every month we get all these people coming in, but guess what? We've got people exiting out that we don't even know about.
Right.
So I think that's sort of a good way of doing it, is just share those numbers with it, not in a threatening way, not in a like you got to do better way, but like, hey, this is the reality.
Yeah. Retention.
Yeah.
It's our biggest obstacle. And
Well,
it really matters how we're, interacting with the new folks and the not new folks, and how are we keeping our students engaged and feeling valuable.
Yeah.
Mhm.
and then tying it back into like that cult of personality. And when you have a certain teacher that seems to have this following in your studio, and I know we've talked about this before, but they might not be the best at like implementing these new things that you want to do, like doing the sales training, yet they somehow draw in all these people and are able to, you know, have these huge numbers, which like I think as a studio owner, you start to weigh in like, okay, how valuable are they really to the studio? If it's somebody that maybe doesn't want to do X, Y, and Z that you're trying to do to improve. So we've talked about this a lot too. And, you know, I think I had a conversation with the studio owner just this week too, where they have this really strong teacher, has a really good following, but they can be very polarizing. And they've also felt like she's done a few things behind their back that wasn't so, on above board.
Mhm.
And so again, we've talked about this, like, how do you keep them? And every time that we've had a studio owner finally say that this isn't working, it hasn't negatively affected the studio in that way, in a huge way.
Not in a huge,
So
typically there's maybe a little bit of fault, but yeah, typically it's not. I was just gonna say, let me think, I had a senior moment there and this thought flew out of my head when you were saying what you were just saying, Carol. But yeah, oh, this is what I was saying. So yes, I had a client, we were looking at, they use My Body. So, My Body has the retention report that you can run, you can look at it. And a lot of the softwares have different types of reports as well. But in My Body, it's like you can see, okay, looking at its teacher and see what their retention is coming back to that same teacher's class versus their retention coming back, that anybody coming back to any other teacher's class. Well, it was interesting going back to that you talking about that rock star teacher, that, the cult teacher, whatever, that has a big following. In this one particular studio, when we looked at this individual's numbers, they sucked at getting new clients to come back to their class. Right? Yeah, they had, repeat clients, but when you looked at the retention of new clients coming back to the class, it was so low. And it was just glaringly obvious. They don't give a crap about new clients. They're teaching to that their own little cult, right?
Yes.
They have these. So that's the other thing to look at too when you're looking at they always have, their classes are full, this or that, is that can be. And when you look at the attendance, is it always the same people? Are new people getting in there? So when we're looking at that, you can look with, particularly with technology now, it's like, okay, what really is going on here?
Yeah. And that again, being new in a new city, Miami, and since November, and so taking classes at different studios and teaching at one studio, but particularly being a client, being a customer, being a student, and noticing how I'm not greeted. And how I'll be a new person in a class, and the teacher is so chummy with everyone, and
Yep.
they're ignoring me.
Yep.
And I'm like, no, I'm not going to come back.
And I bet you anything that teacher is thinking, oh, I'm so great with my community.
So cool. I know.
I'm so cool. And we talk about this a lot, that's it's totally.
Anecdotally, it's like, yeah, this is real. And so I'd be so curious to pull those reports from those particular studios. Like, excuse me, can I just come behind the desk? I'm really curious.
Yeah.
If your numbers back, from my experience.
That's been, I've been just like completely underwhelmed by the yoga studios in the Dayton area. Everybody's always raving about, and I go in, I'm like, nah. Same thing. I did an intro at a studio, never got anything during the whole time the month I was there.
Wow.
Nobody ever introduced themselves to me. And it's just like, in my intro ended, I went a couple of times, no reach out to try to do the next thing, nothing. And I'm like, and it's really sad because the studio is less than 2 miles from my house.
Right.
Right. And I've gone back. In fact, actually, I think I have a class card that expires this month, and I only use like half of it because I'm just, again, underwhelmed. And every time I go, I keep thinking it might, definition of insanity.
Right. Maybe it'll be different this time.
Maybe it'll be better this time. Now, I will say there is one teacher there she is that top-notch teacher. And she is one of the I talked about this a while back, a long time ago. It's like one of the very few teachers that ever came up to me and said, I don't know you, what's your name? And introduced herself to me. It's really kind of sad. And it's like, I practice fitness all over the world, and I can seriously count on one hand the time the teacher actually came up to me, looked me in the and said, I don't know you, what's your name? I'm Terry. Nice to meet you.
What's funny, Terry, is that at this studio that I've been on an intro at, the other day, a new person came into the room. The class hadn't started yet, and it was just me and like 2 other people in there. And she goes, where's the front? And I said, oh, here. And she asked me some more questions and I said, I actually don't know. I've never taken this class before. But I said, the blocks are over there. And then after class, she thanked me. She said, I just want to thank you so much for being so kind and welcoming to me. I'm like, you're welcome. I'm just a student, but.
Well, I tell you,
it goes a long way.
It goes a long way. We talk about learning people's names. Want to talk about retention? Either we talk about there's two big things you can get with retention. Get them to buy something the first month, right? Because then they got a little skin in the game, and get to know their name.
So
people,
true,
yeah, it's like the place I go to here. It's not yoga, guys. It's a workout. It's just a HIIT class. But one of the things that they do is any new person, they call them coaches, they introduce them to another member.
I love that.
Right away.
Wow.
And then hey, and even if they come in like with 2 people, sometimes people come and work out together, but it doesn't matter if it's a brand new client, whether it's, 1 or 2, they will come and say, hey, Terry, would you be Carol and Nina's workout buddy for the session? So they right away introduce you to somebody.
And that's the thing, right? Because we know that people are the number one place people are practicing is at home,
Yeah,
right? And so it's the big deal that they got in their car and then and they came to the
yeah.
studio. So they're
Yep.
coming for an experience.
They're coming for an
That's
experience.
part of the experience that they can't get at home is
Yep.
meeting someone and like, oh,
Well, and I think that like one of the best things that we did at, our studios when we introduced IHP, and it encourages, like I always say at the beginning of my class, look to your right, to your
Right.
left,
Look to the left. These are your work.
if you
Yeah.
don't, and I'll say like, if you don't know that person, introduce yourself. Like, and there's like almost sometimes chatter where I'm like, okay, everybody done, but that's a really big piece. I know. Can we get started now? But I feel like that just goes a long way. And just like you were saying, Terry, it's like they are getting to know people in the community, and it just like, really enhanced the experience for a lot of people.
What I would say when the people were like, I would always go, Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. For those, and then I started when I
you
went,
have to know that movie.
you have to know the movie.
One of
Yeah,
the greatest
course.
movies of all
Yeah,
time.
it is. That's the greatest movie of all time. Yeah. Oh my God, I was just watching a thing. Oh, it was called a great, great sort of docudrama on called Painkiller on Netflix.
I
It's
started
about the whole big pharma and opioid. It is so sad and
yeah.
so like, oh my gosh. But anyway, I mean, um, who played Ferris Bueller?
Yeah. Oh no, I can't remember.
Not Robert Downey Jr. Oh, his name flew
Yeah.
out of my head.
Oh my God. He's
He
so
he
cute.
was the head of the big pharma. He was the CEO of the pharma company, and it took me a while. And I went, "Oh my God, that's Ferris Bueller! How could he be so mean?" Because he was just like a complete and total,
Right.
not a nice. Um, Ferris. I have to look it up. It's driving me crazy.
So funny.
Uh, Matthew Broderick.
The one and only.
Anyway, the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about Nina, or Carol, when you're talking about the talking and, what is that, like bringing people in, kind of made me think about that post that Vicky had posted about her poster about etiquette,
Oh yeah.
right? And, no talking. And we were talking a little bit about that before we got on. And like at my studio, because I had a tiny lobby, the change rooms weren't very big. I did not have a huge space. So the man I bought my studio from, when he built it out, he maximized the hot room, because obviously that's where the revenue is. And so it's like I let people talk. I didn't care. Right. So at my studio, people would come in, they'd go into the hot room. There wasn't really any place in the lobby to sit. I didn't even have benches that people could sit down to put their shoes on. I didn't have room for that. So where people socialized was in the hot room. And I'll never forget one time this visitor came and said, people are talking in there. And it's not just talking, people be laughing and I would go, yeah, isn't that great? And she was just horrified. Now, it kind of evolved. I never really intentionally did it this way, but it just sort of evolved that after class during Savasana, people were very quiet, right? And we would sometimes just please leave quietly. When you leave, please do so quietly so everybody can join their Savasana. But before class, it was like party time.
I know. I think that's like a house rules thing.
Yeah, it is. So it just kind of goes back to that. What about etiquette? Carol, you were talking about, you had a conversation about that with a client in the welcome pack, right?
Yeah, they were kind of, you know, putting together their first welcome packet for their first visit flow. And she wanted to have a welcome letter. And we were discussing, like, she was sort of like, do I put any of these etiquette things in? And I said, oh, actually, Vicky had a great post in OIC about, how do we convey these things? And for a welcome letter, I feel like, this is just welcome. We're so glad you're here. Maybe a few tips for your next class that would help enhance their experience, but not like do this, don't do that, this kind of thing. So we really toned it in a way that was like, for a best experience, make sure you're hydrated, etc., and use the app to book your next class, things like that. And then, we talked about they have some signs around, and I think this came up in the discussion in Vicky's post. It was like, what do we do now? I mean, I think it just depends on the culture of your studio. And I had said something along the lines like, back in the day, I don't know why people even came back. I mean, our welcome letter was like, you do this, you don't do that. This is, and so
And you're out if you do those things. You're out.
exactly.
Yeah, don't sit down, don't leave the room, don't drink water. I mean, obviously, we're talking OG Bikram here. I think too, coming kind of back to what the ethos of the studio is, it's like kids. Kids learn by the behavior that's modeled by their parents. And I think so a lot of that, and it can be just, it's how, again, what is the ethos of the studio? How does the studio model it? How does the owner and the teachers model it? And then what are you talking about? Like you said, talking about best experience. It's like, we encourage, for a good experience, we encourage you to get here so that 10 minutes before class begins, so you have time to settle in and enjoy your practice. I mean, you can talk about some of these things that we'd like to encourage behavior and pitch it. And this is how you get a good experience. And this is why, kind of like with sales, it's like, what's the why behind it? Why is it that we suggest that you do this? And I think some of that is just education, and then just modeling it. And I think then it just sort of, and then I see, because I saw it at my studio, I didn't do this intentionally, like I said, it just sort of evolved, is then it kind of spreads out and it just sort of seems to work as opposed to having all these do's and don'ts.
Right.
Well, and my husband is a teacher, and of young kids, he's elementary school. So he helped me, because in the beginning I was like, my class isn't, they're doing these things. And he's like, you have to praise the things you want. And I was like, oh yeah, it seems so simple. But if you're like, great job on your stillness, and these are little things that, if you want to encourage that you know, in your classes, you could say like, wow, everybody got here with 5 minutes to spare. It's a nice, time to just sort of settle into your class. Like, you could say those things, and that becomes part of the education of the whole and culture of the whole studio. So encouraging the things you want them to do
Like
and
that,
praising them for that.
praising for the things that you want. Yeah, because then it doesn't become, don't do this, you must do this,
Right.
you must do that.
Right.
So you gotta, yeah, it's like you're training them,
Right.
Yeah.
the behaviors you want. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember old school teacher used to start her whole class, her whole intro was don't. And it was like, you just felt the whole energy just like wow, 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 shrinking. And it's like, we're there to feel good, you know? Yeah. And also house rules, different studio etiquettes. I was at a studio north of Miami teaching for several years, and their policy was no talking ever in the room. And sometimes the owner would come in and like reprimand us. And it was like, okay, people are just like enjoying each other.
Well, I think I mean, you can have like I said, sometimes it's party time. Well, it was also different before IHP. It was always a little bit different because we had the music going that. But even before the Bikram classes, people would sit and visit and talk to each other and check in with each other. And yeah, and then because my studio was really involved in the USA Yoga. I fielded a team. What was it 2018? We had 18 competitors from my studio.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, we had a big team, and so a lot of times the competitors would be doing their routines before class.
Right.
People would be going in and out.
Right.
Yeah, I actually had
That's great.
the national youth champion was from my studio a couple of years in a row. So yeah, and you're looking at the 2017 Senior Division Northeast Regional Asana Champion.
Hey, you?
Yeah, me. I did
Awesome.
really good. I actually, one posture I did really well, not so much anymore. I had a really pretty rock solid standing head to knee.
That's awesome.
My favorite posture.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so then we had all kinds of stuff going on in the room before class.
Yeah.
Competitors doing their routines, people talking, this and that. So
Yeah.
I think I love what you said about praising them for the behavior you want. Yeah, I think that's great. Well, I don't know, what else? Etiquette, teachers, behavior.
Teacher development, teacher staff development and feedback, an assessment.
What did you do for that, Nina, with your teachers? How did you approach? Did you do like reviews with the staff, with the teachers?
It evolved over time, for sure. But yeah, towards the end of having my studio, and I was transparent with them. Like I had a tiered pay scale, and it was like, this is what it means, to be at this level and this level. And it's not better or worse necessarily, but like you're rewarded, for example. I mean, not, yeah, yes, rewarded. You get paid more if you're with the studio for longer, because I wanted to encourage, incentivize, stick with me. And yeah, and that also included regular feedback. So I hired somebody to be in that role, to be like the teacher development mentor, lead mentor, something like that, lead teacher. So
Yeah,
they,
I did the same thing. I created a position I called it the teacher liaison.
right,
And that was her role. Her role was to manage the teachers and do the feedback. And because
yeah,
I just like didn't, that was one thing I didn't want to do.
right,
And she was great at it because her background was early childhood development. She was a teacher and she loved to put curriculum together. And I'm like, great. And so that's the other thing too, is that if this isn't in your wheelhouse,
right.
and this is the opportunity to find,
Mhm.
for teachers maybe to make some more money because they can only teach so many classes, is there, if this isn't something you like to do, is
Yeah.
there somebody on your team that could be that role? And then you can pay them to do these other things. We talk about that a lot.
And I
And
actually think even if you do like to do it, I think that there's benefit in having somebody else do it,
yeah,
is like, because you're the big bad boss. I mean, at the end of the day, like we can't get away from some of these archetypes. Like you're the man, you just are, even when you're really cool and you're like, but I'm, I'm your friend. Like, no, you're their boss.
you're their
And
boss.
there's something about having somebody else in that role that's still like, they're a leader, they're in leadership, but yeah, I'm an advocate for that, for hiring out for that.
I think it's interesting because we ran into a little bit of some friction because we wanted somebody in the, as a lead teacher to take on that role, but other other staff members, I think, had a hard time seeing that person in the role. So that can be a challenging sometimes,
Yeah,
uh, to elevate. They feel like now they're above them because they're the ones getting feedback, or
good
so
point.
it can be an interesting dance to figure out how to navigate that.
Well,
Um,
gosh, yeah, and
yeah,
feedback in general is a whole conversation, because
right. They need to be able to do it in a proper way.
and
Yeah, and
That
give
needs to,
feedback.
it
Yeah.
being uplifting rather than, here's what you're doing wrong. No, no, but
right.
like here to support you and uplift you and
Mhm.
empower you. That's
I had a mentor that I used her formula for giving feedback, which I liked. It was, when it just three things, it's like one thing that you felt the person did really well, one thing that you felt could maybe use some improvement, and then a tool to help them.
mm,
It's like, hey, I noticed you did this. And I was, during this second, I was a little confused on what you meant by, and here's something that I have done that helped me with that kind of thing. So that way it wasn't just like, yeah, it was a good thing, something you could improve that I noticed, and here's how you can help. This is something that's worked for me. So it's actually helping people by giving them some tools and techniques of things that have worked for you. And I found that was really effective with my team.
yeah. Josh
Something that,
made a TikTok recently. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
About here's how you give feedback to your teachers. Did you
yes,
see that? And
And
I
I
no, I didn't see the TikTok. I'm not really on
that
TikTok.
girl, I thought it
I
was
think so. I think
sent it to a few studio owners that I know, and teacher mentors that I know.
Yeah.
Just some really great takeaways.
And hey, it may not be too much longer. We're not even able to have TikTok in this country. It's a whole
another
nother topic.
topic.
Another topic. Another topic. Anyway. Oh, wow. So lots of stuff. One thing when we started out at the very, very top of the set here, we talked about, Nina, you said, is your business just a hobby? And that from the E-Myth. And that kind of made me think, I'll just maybe circle back to a meeting with a brand new client this week. Nina was on the call as well. And one of the things we do when we meet with a brand new client is we just sort of do what we call was our basic onboarding. And part of that is we have a little tool called the Healthy Yoga Studio Calculator. And in that calculator, we put in, we see what is a healthy, like, well, what is a healthy yoga studio? What should my expenses be? Because sometimes you're like, well, I have no idea. And so part of it was it's a brand new studio, and is often the case with a brand new studio. Oftentimes the owner is not paying themselves. And so I asked the question, well, what do you want to make? And it was interesting to see her reaction because she hadn't even really thought about that. Right. And I just said, well, what do you need? And of course, what somebody needs from a business is different depending upon a lot of different factors. Some people can live on less, other people, it just depends on what you want, what you feel is ethically, ethically affluent, abundant, right? Everybody's definition that's going to be different. And so she thought about it and said the figure. I said, okay, boom, let's plug this in. And she was like, it was interesting because it was at that point, I don't think she'd even thought about that. Right. And so it kind of goes back to the whole thing we started is that it's not a hobby. Yeah. If you wanted to be successful, let's put it that way.
Right.
Even if you don't need the income from the studio, I almost feel that it still needs to be profitable and successful, because then, okay, maybe you don't need to draw money from it because you have some other sources of revenue. However, what about paying your staff more? What about, you're providing jobs for people in your community.
Right.
So
now your client, you're changing people's lives.
you're changing people's lives, and you can, if you have to have money to do that.
Yes.
All right. Well, any final thoughts from anybody on this 22nd day of March? Well, I will be in Colorado next week at Danielle Barabo, the River Yoga, one of our clients, doing a yoga sales boot camp. Wow. I'm super excited to be doing that. It'll be fun to see people in person. I love Zoom land, but it's also even more fun to get to go out to our clients and see them in person and take some really good yoga classes. I'm excited to go take some yoga classes and just go help their team be better at selling yoga passes to change more people's lives.
So awesome.
Yeah. So I may or may not be able to be on the call next week. Depends on, I have to look at our schedule. So if I don't see you next week, I'll see you the following week.
Okay.
Have fun, Terry.
All right, team. Well, thanks again, everybody. Carol, rest your voice, feel better. Yes. And Nina, again, it's great to have you on our team. All right. What do we always say? Go do some yoga, guys.
Okay.
Big love.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.